Hello, this is Hamlet from the Guild Elitist Jerks on the server Melganis, narrating a time challenge mode run of Scholomance. First note that all five of us look like Professor Slate. We have the polyformic acid potion buff on us. If everyone in your group doesn't have a vial, just run through the normal mode before starting any serious gold run to get the buff. It lasts for an hour and persists through death, so it's pretty convenient. I'm going to say at the outset that we finished this run with a lot of time to spare. Scholomance is in some ways one of the easiest challenge modes. It has some more threatening encounters in it than Gate of the Setting Sun, but it also has more time leeway than any other challenge mode. You can fight trash at a somewhat normal pace and still get the gold, rather than multi-pulling all the trash very aggressively like in some other zones. This video will show off some more aggressive tactics you can use for significant time savings, but you likely won't need to use all of them in order to get a gold. On to the run itself. These Risen Guards put a dispellable debuff on someone that increases damage taken. It's not too bad here, but important to keep in mind if you fight one during the Instructor Chillheart encounter. It makes healing a little harder. Other than that, all they do is a mild dot. Knowing how to pull Chillheart is important. The moment she aggroes, she despawns everything in the room except for Risen Guards as long as they're not in combat. So someone has to hit her with a ranged attack as you're jumping off the ledge before you body pull the Acolyte right underneath you. She has two important abilities to watch out for. Frigid Grasp, which you just saw appear under me. It's a Shadowfisher type ability that you have to move out of before it pops or it'll kill you. And then Ice Wrath, which you just saw appear on me now, which continuously damages anyone standing near you. But you even see that shaman to my left is safe. It's a pretty small radius. You can see a Risen Guard patrolling on the left of the screen. There's another one on the right, so the group has this maybe 15-yard wide safe strip to stand in. But as you can see, there's enough room for 3 or 4 people to stand at range, not stand on top of each other, and everyone having a couple yards to move if they get grasp under them. We used Bloodlust here, so it would be back up for Lily and Voss. I also DPS through Phase 1 because it's easy to heal. Phase 2 tends to have a lot more damage going out once these books are flying around. Somebody also aggroed the Risen Guard on the left. You have to be careful with pets at the transition because they'll run off once the boss dies. You may actually consider killing that guard for mob count purposes, which I'll discuss more later, but this is a pretty awkward time. If you look at where the ranged DPS is standing, it's a mostly safe spot. There's one firebook that goes by roughly every 15 seconds, so you can either take one hit if your HP is fine or dodge out of the way. Here it is coming back again. It passed us on the right, turned around, and then comes back up on the left. That's where it goes every time. With that boss fight over, we're still in combat with the Risen Guard, which is no big deal. Our tank has already gone up ahead to pull the next one in the hallway so we can fight both of them. If you were pulling it intentionally for mob count purposes, you'd probably pull it now and just start DPSing both at the same time. That would also give your healer a combat break. This time around, I'm in combat continuously from the beginning of the zone until all the way after Jandis, and it winds up being a bit of a strain. I'd even used my first Innervate very early in the zone on the first trash mob, so it'd be back up again for Jandis in case that happened. Coming up in the next room are 5 Candlestick Mages, which are dangerous, and a bunch of much easier mobs. Pulling everything at once, especially if you still have a Risen Guard, makes for a pretty challenging trash pull. We chose to fight 2 mages while finishing off the Risen Guard, and then the other 3 mages. Mages put a dispellable dot on people called Skin Like Wax, and just in general do a lot of damage with their main nuke. We use our stun rotation on it here. You can see Remorseless Winter, and then there'll be a cap totem after. We actually should have used one on this set and then one on the next set. This room's not so bad when you do it in 2 separate pulls though, and again, the leeway to do that is one of the reasons this zone is not so strenuous as some of the others. We're going to finish off the Risen Guard at just about the same time as the first 2 Candlestick Mages. You probably want to DPS down the Risen Guard a little before entering this room because it has more HP than the other mobs. Brittle Skeletons have very little HP by the way. They should all die instantly, but if any wind up beating on you, just make sure DPS turns around and kills them. Over here near Jandis, you'll get a reanimated corpse also. It doesn't do very much. You can finish these off and take a combat break before Jandis if you'd like, but she's not very hard to heal. We generally pulled 1 or 2 Candlestick Mages into her because her Death Knight likes to use Dark Simulacrum on her Wondrous Rapidity spell. It does quite a lot of DPS in its own right, and it also finishes off any remaining trash mobs. I'm fine on mana here, since like I mentioned before, my Innervate just came back up. I also haven't used a mana potion. If I got confident in never needing it, I would probably have used a DPS potion during my Heart of the Wild at Chillheart. Outside of the image phases, Jandis is a very easy fight. Obviously people have to dodge Wondrous Rapidity, although watch for tanks who are trying to abuse Vengeance. That's often useful in challenge modes. Heal off people who get hit by Gravity Flux, although it really shouldn't be threatening since nobody's taking damage from anything else. The interesting part of this fight, of course, is being able to find the correct Jandis during the image phases. If your DPS is good at doing that, then there's actually very little healing required even during those. The bulk of the damage you take during the image phases is the explosion that happens when they kill an incorrect one. You can see that happen right here. It's a lot of damage, but it should be fine as long as it's only 1 at a time. It shouldn't be a problem once your DPS gets comfortable knowing how to find the correct Jandis quickly. Other than those explosions, the damage that pulses out constantly during this phase is pretty mild. It drains my mana here, but as you'll see, the two remaining normal phases and then the one image phase where they find the right Jandis on the first try wind up taking almost nothing to heal. As far as finding the correct Jandis, as the healer I can't profess any great knowledge here. The best tool that I know of is a series of macros you can find on Wowhead on the page for the heroic achievement at this boss. It's called Attention to Detail. In one of the comments, I'm sure it'll always be the top comment on that page, there are a few macros. One creates a frame on your screen that shows a full 3D model of whatever you're targeting, and the other one somehow keeps a model of Jandis next to it so that you always have something to compare to. You still have to know all the spots to compare. Her hair, shoulders, belt, gloves, chest piece, and tiara can all be different, but it's much easier when you have the full image on your screen. There are 9 images in challenge mode. Probably the easiest way to do this is to have each of your 3 DPS take one column once they're all proficient making the comparison, and then quickly go down the line. It only takes a couple seconds, and call for an assist when they found the right one. Once they get used to it, it's pretty easy to almost never attack a wrong one, and that mostly removes the healing challenge even during the image phases. Something else to remember for image phases is that dots will continue to tick on her even as she fades into images, so you can get in a little bit of extra damage that way. As the fight ends, I'm waiting by Rattlegore's room while we set up for one of the tougher trash pulls in this zone. I drink up to full while the tank starts running into the room. I've already refreshed hots on him. He's going to pull all of the Bone Weavers in the room. There are a few other ways you can make this pull. A hunter misdirecting half the room makes it easier. If your tank has a battle horn, that's a very stylish way to do it. But otherwise he has to quickly make the loop of the room without dying, possibly with some kind of timer. This pull can do a lot of damage very quickly. The Bone Weavers have a high damage ranged attack called Bone Shards. It's a cone, so it will hit multiple people if they're all in the same direction. Positioning is key here. You can see I, as the healer, didn't wait and LOS the door because then they would potentially stop before they walked around the corner and start casting on me. We used a Ring of Frost to help position them. Basically anything that allows the tank to get them to quickly turn the corner and face him along the wall is fine, and then the rest of us can stand at this sort of 45-degree angle. Expect a lot of damage when all 6 Bone Weavers first turn the corner and start attacking for the first time. Some sort of barrier effect would be great. In our group I told the shaman to use Ancestral Guidance as they were turning the corner, and then I used Tranquility right after that. The latter didn't wind up being necessary this time, as they stayed pretty nicely controlled and we got our stuns off, but it was generally a pretty good safety measure. Coming up now is Rattlegore, another rather straightforward boss. This zone pretty nicely shows the principle that in challenge modes at the gold level, trash tends to be harder than bosses, because bosses are more or less the same every time you fight them and are the same as when you fought them on bronze, but trash you make as hard as you can by pulling faster, and that's where you really gain time. So very often your use of important timers will be decided around trash. This holds true until you start getting into extremely aggressive strategies where you fight trash and bosses at the same time, but I can't think of anywhere that's necessary if your aim is to get golds. There's not very much to say about Rattlegore. Make sure people are prompt about getting their bone armor buff. Not having one is a very silly way to die. The spike does 300,000 damage in challenge mode before any stacks of rusting, so it'll nearly always one-shot you. Don't cut it close on that. I'm not sure it works every time if you try to click the bone pile right as the spike is flying at you, and there's no reason to cut it that close. It's quite easy to get one. You can probably add a little bit of DPS uptime by having a plan for resetting his rusting stacks that doesn't involve someone other than the tank taunting. That way nobody has to stop DPS. In this fight we wind up resetting his stacks twice. I'm going to guess that can pretty easily be worked down to once with a little planning. But again, though, it's not necessarily worth using important timers in order to let your tank stay in there longer, because they're going to be much more useful if you can use them to clear the upcoming trash room more quickly. I spend quite a lot of my time DPSing in this encounter as it is, although I don't use Heart of the Wild here because I'm saving it for the Lillian Voss skip. While we wait for Rattlegore to finish, I'll talk about planning out the next room. It has 20 mobs in it, 16 Crestanovian Carvers and 4 Flesh Horrors. We currently have 15 mobs killed, and that includes 1 extra Risen Guard we pulled in Chillheart's room, so we're going to clear out the entire next room and then be done with trash. Of the various routes you might consider for gold, this one is quite fast because it doesn't require fighting any of the board students in Professor Slate's room, but it's somewhat harder because pulling the entirety of the next room at once is a very aggressive pull. It's the most ambitious thing you're going to see us do during this video. If you don't want to learn that pull in order to get your gold, then you can skip 5 mobs, probably 4 in the upcoming room, and the 1 extra Risen Guard we pulled at the beginning, since Risen Guards are very high HP mobs. Then you pull 1 pack of 5 board students in Professor Slate's room. You'll have ample time to do that, especially if you make use of the Lillian Voss skip that you'll see in a few minutes. The key to this room is that the Crestanovian carvers have a damage taken debuff. It spreads and stacks onto any number of nearby carvers whenever one dies, so the more you have clumped up at once as you DPS them, the greater of a multiplicative effect you're going to have. So you want to gather as many of them as you can handle using all your cooldowns, and no matter what, don't kill all of the carvers in the front half of the room before you pull the ones you're going to fight in the back half of the room, because then you lose your debuff stack. Here you can see us getting the entire room at once, but it's fine to slow it down a little. We used important survivability cooldowns like Shield Wall and Iron Bark as he's gathering. We also used mobility cooldowns. I should actually have Stampeded right before shifting into tree form. The moment they're gathered, we start our stun rotation. Here's Remorseless Winter followed by Capacitor Totem, and there's also an Army of the Dead coming out. The flesh horrors aren't going to die until the meat grafts die, and we're just AoEing them down along with everything else. This would actually be another nice place to use a G91 Landshark for an uncapped AoE hit. As soon as the stun rotation wears off, we have to start kiting. What I didn't mention before is that the blood debuff on the Crestanovian Carvers also increases their damage done, so once you start stacking it up by killing piles of them near each other, your tank is going to have to start moving out. Our DPS is a little low here because we hadn't practiced this too many times. They should really be starting to die around when the stuns are wearing off, and then your tank starts kiting immediately after that. Our tank here nicks this table as he's turning the corner while kiting and instantaneously dies, which immediately causes the Death Knight to die as well. It's fine though, most of them are dead and the others are going to die very rapidly. Watch out that everyone in your group is probably going to get a little bit of a lag spike as 99 debuffs jump across the last few mobs. It might actually be a good idea to have the DPS focus one or two carvers while the tank is running around gathering, get them to low HP, and then make sure to finish them off right after the mobs are clumped to start the spreading faster. Those deaths don't actually waste too much time because we have to wait for the Lily and Voss RP. As usual in challenge modes, healer drinks while someone else reses, especially here because I had burned a whole mana bar in that room. Now, the goal at Lily and Voss is to try to skip phases 2 and 3 entirely by DPSing her all the way down during the transition to phase 2. The transition starts at about 58% and you have to get it to about 1% and you're going to have about 30 seconds. You'll have to save all your timers for the transition with the exception of DPS potions, which you can't use since we'll be using invis potions immediately afterwards. If you can't do it, you can still get gold, but you'll have to use some of the more aggressive tactics elsewhere in the zone. If you can do it, you'll have ample time to do the rest of the zone carefully. It doesn't actually require incredible DPS, a little bit of practice on the timing can go a long way. She uses this Death's Grasp 30 seconds into the fight. If you can transition her before she finishes the cast, it's ideal. It may be very doable if your healer respecs to DPS or you pre-pot for the fight, but we didn't find it worth the trouble here. We just set up a controlled transition in an empty corner of the room as soon as she was done. The transition is going to start at just about 58%. Anyone in the group who has dots and debuffs that use a GCD and anything else they want to use in preparation, they should load up before 60, so that the moment she hits 58, people are already casting their hard nukes on her. We started our Bloodlust during that period as well, and I use Heart of the Wild. You want to make sure that all of your high DPS abilities are already going when she starts moving. The reason we tank her in a corner as we set up for that is that we gain the extra few seconds she takes to walk to the center. When your boss mod shows the alert for the Unleashed Anguish buff, you have about 10 seconds to go. The fight will end when you get her to 1%. This actually saves so much time that if you can't do it without DPS potions, I would just use the potions, skip 5 mobs like I described earlier, and then use the time while you wait for the potion cooldown to kill 5 bored students at the beginning of this room. You won't see any bored students in this video, but they're pretty straightforward. They do some AoE, so don't clump, watch for spikes on your tank, and use your usual stuns. Start this invis run as soon as you're out of combat with Lillian, make sure everyone checks that. Otherwise, this invis run is trivial. It's a very short distance. Somebody has to open the door out of the room, which drops them out of invis, but if they press up against the door when they do it, they won't aggro anything. Dark Master Gandling himself can be a somewhat long fight, and there are a couple things to watch out for. Most of the time, he just chain casts an Incinerate spell on the tank, which does a medium amount of damage and requires continuous healing. He'll occasionally immolate the tank, and you just be ready to dispel that off immediately, and then the damage intake doesn't change. The only interesting thing that happens is when the tank or healer gets sent into a study room, Gandling will stop casting and spend the entire duration channeling Rise, which continuously summons failed students. Failed students explode for a huge amount of damage 8 seconds after appearing. There are 2 ways of dealing with them. The first would be to have everyone stand on the boss and do continuous AoE DPS during the Rise channel, such that each failed student is guaranteed to die within 8 seconds. The other is what you see here, which is to have DPS at this spot on the ledge, make sure to get aggro on each one as it appears. They will run up the stairs and around the top balcony and will time out and explode before they reach us. Doing it this way, melee DPS just have to be careful with things like Howling Blast that'll prevent them from aggroing onto the ranged. The mechanic for healers getting ourselves out of these rooms is that the fresh test subjects are bombs. You detonate them by dispelling them. It takes 2 hits to kill any of the targets. Unfortunately, I couldn't get them all clumped for the first one, so that means there's some left alive after the second one, and then I have to wait out a third dispel cooldown before I can get them all dead. That's fine, though it still gets me out of the room pretty quickly. However, something extremely unfortunate happens right here, which is the moment I kill the last ones, turn around and run through the open door, there's a pack of failed students exploding right in front of me. This is something I'd never seen happen to myself or anyone else in any practice run, so I just wasn't even thinking about it. In the future, I'll just have to remember to take note in the rare case I get sent to that specific room and be very careful coming out of it. Fortunately for us, it's not a wipe, but it's still a huge hassle and it ruins our time on the boss. The elemental shaman has to heal for quite a while and do 0 DPS, and the tank is taking a lot of damage because nobody can dispel as incinerate. The death knight has to take a little time to build up RP and then run all the way up here trying to find me. This was further complicated by the fact that he was having mumble issues today and couldn't talk to anybody, which caused various hiccups at other points in the run. With everything sort of put back together, all told we lost about 30 seconds taking care of that freak accident. But this is one of the lessons of challenge modes. Unexpected things will always happen, and it's very important to be good at remembering them and having a way of preventing them in future runs. Back to the fight, so what I was thinking about as I was running out the door is that the moment the tank or healer finishes a stint in the study room is the most dangerous part of the fight. As soon as the door opens, Gandling stops channeling Rise and goes back to his normal behavior of casting Incinerate, and without the tank or the healer there, you can have a few dangerous seconds before they get back in a position and get back to doing what they're supposed to be doing. So it's a good time for either the tank to use a cooldown or for the healer to be ready to heal some other DPS for a little bit. Here, after the death, I just have to do a little bit of low mana healing for the rest of the fight. It's a pretty good thing to be comfortable with for challenge modes because it comes up a lot, especially after anything unexpected goes wrong. It's scary to look at an empty mana bar, but if you take stock of your cooldowns and other available resources, you can often surprise yourself with how long you last before things actually fall apart. So if that all hadn't happened, he'd have been dead already, with more than 2.5 minutes to go. And that goes back to what I said at the beginning of this video. We mostly did this zone in what you might call challenge mode style, the same sort of pace you'd use to get a gold in any other zone, but you just don't have to in Scholomance. Especially if you can do the Lillian Voss skip, which is a more straightforward speed trick than what's possible in most challenge modes. You have ample time to do the rest of